You're listening to Odyssey, A Tale from the Road, an audiobook by Christopher Cologne. All rights reserved. Any resemblance to persons living or dead are purely coincidental.
Chapter 46. It was all slow motion from that point. My senses were heightened in survival mode. There were too many guns in this room and this Mexican standoff wasn't going to last long. Nobody was pointing their gun at me, even though I was the one that set off the catalyst in this explosive reaction. The greedy suits weren't going to let Arnie take over Penny's contract. Paul wasn't going to let the suits confront his boss. The state troopers weren't going to let Paul point his gun at the suits. Arnie's men weren't going to let the troopers point their guns at Paul. And the governor wasn't going to let anyone get hurt in this confrontation. The governor never had a chance. Paul shot first. The suit that had confronted Arnie, also the same suit that had mocked me and was manhandled by the governor, was dead. Paul had put a shot in the dead center of the suit's skull. The suit's head exploded in spray of blood and brain matter. Paul was an excellent marksman. The gunshot sounded familiar. It was the same gun used to shoot at me and my bandmates when we were flipped upside down in Gabby's Cadillac on the side of the road, so many months ago. If, back then, Paul had seen that any of us were still alive in the caddy, he would have picked us off as easy as shooting fish in a barrel. The rest of the suits had recoiled in terror. It had seemed that their group had all been psychically linked. In watching their brother die, they all screamed in horror. But the fear quickly turned into rage. The suits wanted to avenge their fallen brother. They ascended onto Paul. Paul didn't know who those shoot. He was quickly surrounded by suits. The suits didn't have any weapons when they approached Paul. He just scanned his gun, pointing at each of their heads, demanding that they back up while he tried to take a defensive position. It reminded me of the way they had engulfed Penny before the concert. Paul panicked and shot the suit that was directly in front of him. That suit died immediately from the pinpoint shot between the eyes. The remaining suits had finally created a circumference around Paul. He was overwhelmed as they started to pummel him with their fists. Paul had no chance to defend himself or do any more damage. He was enclosed in a gauntlet of hazing. The state troopers had tried to get a clear shot at Paul, once he had killed the first suit. But since the other suits had Paul surrounded, the troopers would have risked shooting one of the suits by accident. In the eyes of the troopers, the suits were innocent, so they didn't hazard to try and shoot Paul. The troopers made no attempt to try and stop the suits from pummeling Paul. It was a form of justice they understood. The suits were just paying Paul back for killing two of their own. The troopers kept pointing their guns towards Paul and made feeble attempts at ordering the suits to stop their assault. The troopers had bigger problems. They had been outnumbered by the amount of Arnie's men and security guards that had seemed to line the walls of the dressing room. Arnie's men had ordered the troopers to drop their weapons. The troopers were used to being the ones making demands, not the other way around. The troopers had turned their focus from the dogpile on top of Paul and turned their guns outward to the security guards on Arnie's payroll. There had always been friction between the police and security forces, and that only added to the tension in the room. Scores were about to be settled. So far there had only been 2 shots, and both of them were from Paul's gun. Paul had a quick temper. The suits were settling their score with their fists. Everybody else had held back on shooting their guns, in fear of starting an all-out war. They were all yelling and threatening, but nobody wanted to take the responsibility of making the first shot. I looked over at Minerva and she was just as scared as I was. I used my eyes and motioned towards the door. I tried my best to silently communicate my intentions. Minerva seemed to get my point. She was to grab her brother, Layla, and Bruce and we would all make a break for the door. I already knew, no matter how much we tried, the governor wasn't going to budge until he felt it was appropriate. The governor was as stubborn as a mule. That was his strength and his weakness. Arnie. Call your men off. Tell them to stand down, now. The governor's voice seemed to boom over everybody else's. I'm afraid I can't do that. Brother Arnie was back to full consciousness. He was all too alert, despite all the drugs coursing through his system. This has gone too far, even for me to stop. There's still a chance, we can all walk away from this. Just tell you men to put their guns down. I promise, you'll get a fair trial. The governor thought he was making sense. But you can't try to be rational with irrational people. Even a wise man like the governor should have known that. Fuck that, said one of the goons flanking Arnie Ellis, I'm not going back to jail. Die you fucking pigs, and with that final statement, the goon took a shot at one of the state troopers. The goon's gunshot caught one of the troopers in the chest. The trooper went tumbling backwards. The other troopers retaliated and gunned down the goon where he stood. The rest of Arnie's men took aim at the other troopers and started to fire. I dropped to the ground. Had anyone been paying close attention to me, they would have thought that I was shot also. I wasn't, I was just getting out of everybody's line of fire. I knew where dressing room door was, from when I was located, but I had to crawl around on my hands and knees to get to it. Also, I couldn't see Minerva or anybody else from our entourage from my position on the ground. The couches in the dressing room had blocked my view of everything. Bullets ripped through the air just a few feet over my head as I made a mad dash to the door, all the while on all fours. As I made it by the last couch of this deadly obstacle course, I had a clear line towards the door. I looked over and saw Minerva and her brother, along with Layla and Bruce on their hands and knees. They had taken my example of dropping to the ground for survival. Since Bruce was blind, Layla had the extra duty of guiding the old and arthritic man to the door, while ducking for cover. We made our way to the door. Then a large figure had tumbled over my crouched body as I wade way towards the dressing room door. It was the governor. His was backing up and tripped over my body. His tall frame looked like giant tree falling in the middle of the woods. He was gripping his arm, in an attempt to stop the gushing blood. He was shot in the arm, and falling over my body didn't help the situation any. "Dad!" Minerva yelled, as she got to her feet and ran over to her fallen father. A couple of more shots whizzed by overhead. Had the governor still been standing, those bullets would have entered his body. Tripping over me had saved his life. Seeing Minerva stand up, I needed to get all of us out of harm's way. I thought fast, "Minerva, grab your father and let's get out the door." Minerva took her father's side, the one that had been shot. "Are you all right, Dad?" The governor looked stunned. He didn't answer and I knew he was going into shock. I grabbed his good side, started to drag him towards the door, with Minerva in tow. "We have to get out of here," I screamed. Milling around next to Minerva and her father was like standing around two huge targets. We needed to escape immediately. We wrestled the governor out the door as the shootout continued in the dressing room. One of the state troopers exited the room moments after us. He pulled out his two-way radio and screamed into its microphone, "Shots fired." I repeat. "Shots fired. The governor has been shot. Requesting a medical evacuation response to Olympic Stadium, forthwith. SWAT team and crowd control riot squad on standby." The dispatcher's voice on the other end of the radio crackled, "What is your position?" "Medical evacuation team is on its way. But we need your location for rapid extraction." The trooper looked exasperated. "I don't know where the hell we are." "Park the helicopter in the middle of the stadium's field, for Christ's sake. The people will get the hint and clear the hell out of its way." The dispatcher argued back, "That's highly unorthodox. The stadium is filled with people right now. We can't take that risk of hurting innocent people, to save one man." "Are you listening to me, dispatch?" The trooper barked into his radio, "This is the fucking governor. You get that chopper here, in the stadium, this very instant or you won't have a job tomorrow. I'm escorting the governor to the field right now. If the governor dies, it will be all your fault." The dispatcher's voice came on the radio after a brief moment. "Acknowledged, trooper. Estimated time of arrival for the helicopter, 10 minutes. The trooper answered back, "You better make it 5 minutes. This is my last transmission, dispatch. We're en route to the field, right now." The trooper took my position on the side of the governor. I'm glad he did. I didn't have the strength or the stature to successfully maneuver the governor all the way back to the field. Minerva was panicked but kept herself together enough for her father. Stephen was a little too stunned himself to be helpful, so he just escorted Layla and Bruce. Follow me," was all I could utter out. It was my job to lead our group to the field. I knew the way back to the side of the stage, so we'll just make our way to the field from there. It's always been my job to lead. We made our way through the maze of hallways back to the side of the stage. Bullets were still being shot in the dressing room as we made our departure. The concert was still going on. The pounding music from the speakers had kept the audience oblivious to the massacre that was going on backstage. In the few minutes it took for us to get to the side the stage, the helicopter had made its approach to over the stadium. The band was still playing and the crowd was still rocking. From my vantage point I had seen the chopper hover a distance over the crowd. Its high-intensity spotlight was scanning the crowd, as it got closer. Tonight was such an over-the-top spectacle, that the crowd just thought the chopper was just a curious pilot, who couldn't get tickets and decided to get a free show from the air. Nobody seemed to move. "You need to get out there and tell those people to clear out and give the helicopter space to land," the trooper told me. He motioned towards the governor, who was now turning pale. "My hands are a little full right now." There were security guards around the stage. Whether or not they knew what had been going on backstage, they weren't about to let me storm the stage. I saw the look on Minerva's face. She was going to lose her father if I didn't do anything. She has done so much for me. How the hell could I not step up now that I was needed the most? I regained all my guts and ran towards the stage.
Please visit twostrangersonePodcast.net.